2022 was a particularly bad year for mass shootings in Sacramento. On April 3rd, in 3 minutes, at least 5 people fired over 100 rounds in a shootout in front of a downtown jewelry store. When they heard the rapid-fire shots, the officers ran to the source and located a large group of people and gunshot victims. They began life-saving measures on victims on the scene. Despite this, 6 people wouldn't make it. 3 men and 3 women. 12 other people had been shot. One of these 12 was Smiley Martin, who was located at the scene with serious gunshot injuries and was transported to an area hospital for treatment. Smiley was quickly identified as a person of interest and remained under the supervision of an officer at the hospital while his treatment continued. It would turn out that a lot of the rapid-fire shots came from Smiley's handgun, a Glock 19 modifier with an attachment wreaking havoc on America's streets. A switch. 3 of the deceased were Devasia Turner, Sergio Harris, and Joshua Hoy Lucchesi. But, based on later investigations, the 3 were determined to be participants in the shooting, and the Sacramento County DA's office was not considering them victims. Fairly quickly, police deduced that the incident was almost certainly gang-related, and that they'd be on the hunt for the other 2 suspects that made it out alive.
I'ma put your name on the tomb, nigga.
Back in April 2021, a deputy district attorney argued against Smiley Martin's early release from prison. In a letter to the parole board, she wrote, "Inmate Martin has, for his entire adult life, displayed a pattern of criminal behavior. Regardless, based on good credits, 27-year-old Smiley was released in April 2022 after doing about 5 of a 10-year sentence." True to the attorney's words, Smiley had a bad record with law enforcement, stretching back to his teenage years. He had charges for gun possession, obstruction of justice, robbing a Sacramento Walmart of $2,800 in Galaxy notebooks, and a particularly egregious charge from May 2017 that landed him the 10-year sentence. Court documents read that Smiley Martin forcibly entered his girlfriend's residence, where he found her hiding in her bedroom closet. He then hit her repeatedly with a closed fist on her face, head, and body, causing visible injuries. After, he dragged her out of her home by her hair to an awaiting car. After putting her in the car, he then assaulted her with the belt. Martin's 26-year-old brother, Dondre, who will feature later in the story, didn't have a sterling legal record either. He had multiple brushes with the law for aggravated assault, domestic violence, and violating probation. Court records show he also pleaded guilty to punching, kicking, and choking a woman in a hotel room where she refused to work for him as a prostitute. Like Smiley, Dondre's crimes spanned the whole 2010s decade, and he had served time in prison. But since November 2020, Dondre had been a free man. Dondre was an aspiring rapper, and he uploaded videos to his YouTube account, where he's known as Dre the Mac. His SoundCloud username was Dre Mac, and it said he was from both Sacramento and Phoenix. In Speaking on Me, one of Dondre's tracks, a man is seen holding a semi-automatic gun, a never-present theme in his music that was based on antagonizing gang rivals in the ghettos of Sacramento. 45% of violent crime in Sacramento happens in small neighborhoods. These neighborhoods are home to the 3,000 plus gang members in the city. The Martin brothers, Peyton, and the 3 men who were killed all had local gang ties. Court documents revealed that Hoy Lucchesi and Smiley were a part of the Garden Block Crips, the oldest Crip hood in Sacramento, stretching way back to the 70s. Peyton and Turner were a part of a rival gang called the G-Mob. Harris, a cousin to Turner, was a former member of a gang allied with G-Mob called Del Paso Heights Bloods, but was still social with some of its members. It's a legend that the conflicting parties had a long-standing beef going all the way back to prison. And it would all come to a head when they ran into each other on the night of April 2nd. Sacramento is a work and play city, and the night of April 2nd presented many prospects for a good time out. But some people had other ideas. In a social media clip posted hours before the shooting, the Martin brothers are seen posing with Hoy Lucchesi with 2 handguns and a rifle. In the video, Hoy Lucchesi and Smiley talk about going downtown armed to loiter outside nightclubs and brag about shooting at their enemies. In the same video, both Hoy Lucchesi and Smiley Martin state their allegiance to the Garden Block Crips. Later that night, 70 to 80 people were gathered near 10th and K Streets, an area packed with bars, restaurants, hotels, and museums, blocks away from the state capitol and the Sacramento Kings Arena. Earlier, rapper Tyler the Creator performed at an arena in front of thousands of fans, and many still lingered in the area after. By 2 p.m., bars were closing and people were flocking onto the street. But no one expected to be ducking bullets moments after. In the aftermath, security cameras would help trace a picture of the build-up to the massacre. Devasia Turner and Medulla Payton are seen on surveillance video arriving in a white Chevrolet Equinox and a dark gray Ford Mustang outside Rodney's cigar and liquor store. Sergio Harris is seen parking his Jaguar sedan in front of Rodney's liquor store, behind Turner and Payton's vehicles. Turner and Payton walk down 10th Street and arrive at the District 30 nightclub at 1022 K Street. Their pictures are taken as a part of the nightclub security system. Surveillance footage shows Hoy, Smiley, and Dondre Martin walking southbound on 11th Street, crossing over Jazz Alley. Dondre and Smiley scan into the District 30 nightclub, but never enter the club. They loiter outside with Hoy, eventually making their way across the street from the nightclub. Payton and Turner exit the District 30 nightclub and walk across the street to Hoy and the Martin brothers. They talk for about 2 minutes before Turner and Payton walk away. Hoy and the Martin brothers walk up to Turner and Payton, who were standing in front of the Crest Theater. About 3 minutes later, Payton motions with his right arm in the air and appears to wave for more people to join him. He then heads back towards his car. He retrieves something from his car, puts it in his sweatshirt, and walks back in the direction he came. Payton is stopped by 2 people on the sidewalk of 10th Street. He talks to them and points towards the intersection of 10th and K Streets, before breaking away and heading south on 10th Street. Those 2 people who stopped Payton walked up to Harris to talk to him and point south toward K Street. Harris responds by motioning with his head to follow him as he walks down the sidewalk. Payton and Turner are recorded on the corner of Sharif Jewelers, located on the northeast intersection of 10th and K Streets. 3 minutes later, Hoy and the Martin brothers make their way to that area amongst the crowd. Turner is standing in the northeast intersection of K and 10th Streets with about 80 other people. Turner, Harris, and Payton head north on 10th Street. At the same exact time, Dondre and Smiley were walking from J down toward the intersection. 8 seconds later, people are seen running from the area. Police say that at this point, everyone involved in the incident was standing on the northeast intersection of K and 10th, standing only feet away from each other. Police said that Hoy, standing next to Smiley, started pointing at rival gang members, Payton and Turner. Officers also said it appeared as though Hoy was holding a dark object in his hand, consistent with a black firearm. Police say Payton turned his back to his rivals and reached for something in his waistband. Harris crossed K Street to head towards his friends, Turner and Payton. One of the victims, Jontea Alexander, parked their car, walked across the street to Harris to get her sister. Her family later told reporters that she was picking up her older sister from a club. They believe she exited her car to either check on her sister or buy her sister a hot dog before shots were fired. Detectives say Smiley had a gun in his left hand with an extended magazine. Right before the gunshots go off, there's a street brawl involving several people. Its connection to the shooting has never been established. Part of the incident was captured on security camera. Surveillance footage shows muzzle flashes coming from the area of Turner and Harris. Yamil Martinez, one of the female victims, is seen falling behind Hoy and Smiley. Turner is then seen backpedaling and heading northbound on 10th Street, with his arm extended and firing multiple rounds at the Martin brothers. Smiley is seen stepping to the west and firing his fully automatic handgun toward Harris and Turner. Dondre fires a handgun north in the direction of Harris and Turner, and Payton is seen falling down and scrambling to get up. Hoy is seen falling to the ground along Sharif Jewelers' south wall. Payton is seen running northbound on 10th Street and firing a handgun toward 10th and K Streets. Payton continues to run northbound while firing a handgun southbound before turning the corner, getting into his white Chevrolet Equinox and fleeing the scene. Officers patrolling near the scene had heard the shots at 2 a.m. and they rushed over to provide emergency aid. When the officers get there, Smiley is then seen tossing the handgun away right before officers stop him. Investigators later found the gun, a Glock 19 handgun with an extended 30-round magazine, a tactical laser sight, and a full automatic selector switch. The scene after the shooting was chaotic and full of grief. Police car sirens, screams, and people frantically making phone calls to loved ones. In the aftermath of the 2-minute massacre, people had scattered in all directions, and some were even hiding behind trees and garbage bins. Police taped off the streets near the scene till Monday. In the days after, the streets were covered in candles and flower memorials, and the California Assembly and Sacramento Kings held a moment of silence in honor of the victims. The incident sparked a debate about gun laws, especially automatic weapons. It sparked a conversation about culture too. Detectives found more than 100 shell casings, and buildings and cars riddled with bullets. Ballistic analysis would show that 28 rounds came from Smiley's gun alone. It would turn out to be a very complex investigation with several witnesses, video and photo evidence, and plenty of physical evidence. Sacramento PD would later receive more than 170 video and photo files in an evidence portal. They showed the mayhem that night and that 76 shots had been fired in 54 seconds. The businesses in that area didn't recover for months. More than 40 detectives were involved in the investigation, 12 of them full-time. The FBI and the Federal Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives assisted in the investigation. Police served search warrants at 3 homes, and at least 1 handgun was recovered. Detectives located Dondre on April 4th. He faced assault and firearm charges. When Smiley was released from the hospital, he was booked into the county jail on charges of being a prohibited person with a firearm and being in possession of a machine gun. Lastly, Sacramento police detectives and the FBI were able to determine that Payton was living in an apartment complex in Las Vegas and worked with Las Vegas Metro PD to arrest him on May 28th. Aside from the shootings, Payton was also charged with 3 counts of EDD fraud related to pandemic aid. All 3 were being charged with murder in the deaths of the 3 women. It didn't matter who fired the shots. On June 8, 2024, Smiley Martin was found dead in his jail cell. The cause of death has yet to be determined. Prosecutors are seeking life without parole for Dondre Martin and Mutula Payton. The trial is ongoing. Whatever gargantuan beef or slight inspired that brazen shootout on a packed street corner, it was an extremely irrational act, a major violation of a universal gang code. No civilians. They get no sympathy from anyone and best gear up for their next adventure. Life in the California prison system. On the outside, it was just another house on 4th Avenue in Richmond, Virginia. A quiet middle-class neighborhood, the kind of place where families grew, where children played. But step inside the home where James Briley raised his 3 sons, Linwood, James Jr., and Anthony, and a different world emerges. A world a prosecutor would later describe as eerie. Here, the air hung heavy with tension. Out of fear of his own boys, the father, a longtime employee of a local concrete company, kept a padlock on his own bedroom door at night. The Briley brothers were fascinated by creatures that belonged in jungles, not suburban living rooms. Boa constrictors, tarantulas, and piranhas. They entertained themselves by feeding live mice to their snake. This unsettling interest in deadly creatures, this strange atmosphere, It hinted at a darkness that would soon consume the entire city. Before they became the notorious Briley Brothers for orchestrating one of the most vicious murder sprees in Virginia's history, Linwood, James, and Anthony were simply three boys from Richmond's North Side. They weren't born into obvious turmoil. Their mother worked at Virginia Union University, and their father was a disciplinarian, instilling fear but also providing a stable foundation. Neighbors even remembered them as helpful, lending a hand with car repairs or mowing lawns for the elderly. But beneath that veneer, something was very wrong. On January 28, 1971, the true nature of the eldest brother, Linwood, revealed itself. At just 16 years old, Linwood calmly aimed a rifle out of a window in his home and pulled the trigger. His victim was a 57-year-old Orlean Christian, a kindly neighbor who had just buried her husband and was hanging laundry in her backyard. She collapsed on the spot. Her death, initially thought to be a heart attack, went unquestioned. But when the funeral home returned the robe she had been wearing, the family noticed a small, bloody hole in the back. They alerted the police. When confronted, Linwood's response was chilling. He admitted to the shooting, but claimed Orlean would have died anyhow, citing a rumor about her heart trouble. His callousness, his utter lack of remorse at such young age, was a prelude to the terror to come. He was convicted of manslaughter and served just over a year in a juvenile institution after his lawyer argued it was an accident and Linwood was actually shooting at pigeons. But the darkness within Linwood had taken root. James was also later arrested and imprisoned for shooting at an officer during a chase. The year 1979 plunged Richmond into a nightmare. For 7 horrifying months, the Briley Brothers, now joined by a teenage accomplice, Duncan Meekins, embarked on a murder spree that defied logic, reason, and any semblance of humanity. There was no discernible pattern, no specific type of victim. They struck across diverse neighborhoods, targeting men and women, black and white, rich and poor. This reign of terror left the city gripped by fear, every resident wondering who would be next. It was a reign of terror that slipped beneath the radar of law enforcement for months. There was no sense of a common killer. The Brileys killed with such versatility that police initially did not see a pattern. The killings took place in desperate neighborhoods throughout Richmond and Henrico County, further obscuring the connections. James and Linwood murdered to eliminate witnesses, but according to investigators, they also seemed to enjoy it. Prosecutors, Warren Vutschuk, once remarked that Linwood was extremely intelligent, but had an inadequately developed conscience, while James was cold and reckless, a man born to die in the electric chair. One survivor of the Brileys' brutal spree was William Butcher and his wife Virginia. On March 12, 1979, the Brileys knocked on the couple's door under the pretense of needing to call AAA. When Butcher opened the door, they forced their way in at gunpoint. The couple was tied up in separate rooms, doused in lighter fluid, and left to burn alive as the house was set ablaze. But 15-year-old Meekins, who was assigned to tie them up, was an obvious amateur, even loosening up the ropes when Mr. Butcher told him it hurt. Butcher managed to free himself and his wife, and they escaped the inferno. Their methods were as varied as their victims. March 21st, Michael W. McDuffie was shot during a robbery. A former vending machine serviceman, McDuffie was killed simply because he crossed paths with the wrong people at the wrong time. His murder signaled the start of what would become a relentless series of killings. On April 9th, 76-year-old Mary W. Gowan was followed home from babysitting, then assaulted, robbed, and fatally shot. Her body was found lying face down in her bedroom. Her small house had been ransacked, and the brutal nature of her death stunned even seasoned investigators. July 4th, Linwood catches 17-year-old Christopher Phillips trying to break into his car. He is dragged into a nearby alley, pinned down by James, and Meekins and Linwood drops a cinder block on his skull, killing him in broad daylight. September 14th, John Gallagher, Johnny G, a popular 62-year-old DJ, was abducted at gunpoint after stepping outside a dance hall he was playing at with a band. The Briley Brothers and Meekins forced Gallagher into the trunk of his car, drove him into an isolated island in the James River. There, Linwood Briley shot him in the back of the head. Fishermen found him partially submerged in the river 2 days later. The loot? $6 and a distinctive turquoise ring taken by Linwood. His trophy-keeping habit would later help detectives confirm his involvement. September 30th, Mary S. Wilfong, a 62-year-old private nurse, was robbed and beaten to death on the steps outside her apartment. October 6th, Blanche Page, 79, was bludgeoned to death in her own home, just 2 blocks from the Briley's residence. A boarder in her house, Charles Garner, 59, suffered a fate almost too gruesome to recount. After being killed with a baseball bat, 5 knives, a pair of scissors, and a fork were stuck in his back. Then, his body was set on fire. Meanwhile, the brothers grew bolder. They kept a scrapbook of press clippings of their crimes. They were known to practice martial arts in local parks and carried themselves with a brazen, menacing arrogance. Law enforcement eventually began to suspect a loose group of aggressive young men, but the pieces had not yet come together. On October 19th, 1979, James Briley appeared in court and assured a Richmond judge he had no intention of getting into trouble again. He had recently been released on parole after serving some time for a convenience store robbery. That very night, he and his crew murdered 3 people, the gang's most horrific crime. Earlier that evening, a police investigator was conducting surveillance from a van parked near the Briley home. She overheard James and Linwood arguing about whether police were inside the van. James was skeptical, but Linwood was suspicious. To test it, the brothers approached the green Chevrolet van, peered through the tinted windows and shook it. James even fired a gun into the air and into the ground to provoke a reaction. He told Linwood that if police were inside, they would have come out after the gunshots. Convinced, they left in their car. Despite being under surveillance from both the ground and the air, authorities eventually lost track of the Brileys that night. That crucial error would cost Judy Diane Barton, 8 months pregnant, her common-law husband Harvey Wilkerson, and their 5-year-old son Harvey Barton, their lives. The Brileys and Meekins planned to rob the Wilkersons' home, a short distance from the Briley residence. James and Linwood entered first, followed by Anthony and Meekins. Wilkerson and Judy Barton were bound with electrical tape, gagged, and placed on the floor. What followed was unspeakable. 2 of the Brileys and Meekins assaulted Judy Barton. Meekins then fatally shot Harvey Wilkerson, the husband. James Briley then did the same to the 5-year-old Harvey Barton. While conducting surveillance, police heard gunshots and saw the Briley gang run to their car and drive away. However, they were unable to pinpoint the origin of the shots and let the group go. It wasn't until 2 days later that the bodies of the 3 victims were discovered in the stifling hot house after someone alerted the authorities. Inside the home, investigators found that Wilkerson's pet snakes had been released by the Brileys before they fled, requiring animal control to clear the scene. One officer recalled that the blood-caked floors made his shoes stick and the foul stench clung to his clothes so badly he threw them away when he got home. The day after the grisly discovery, police arrested the Briley brothers and Meekins. Linwood was arrested after a foot chase where he jumped from a moving car. The car, which also held his father and Meekins, crashed into a telephone pole, allowing police to apprehend Meekins as well. Once in custody, Meekins quickly began cooperating with police. In the presence of his parents, he confessed not only to the Barton Avenue killings, but also revealed the Brileys' involvement in other crimes previously unlinked to them. He also recounted a chilling detail Before police even discovered the bodies, James Briley returned to the crime scene to steal a TV, stepping over the bodies to take it for his room at his father's house. When they brought Linwood in for questioning, an investigator who was a close friend of John Gallagher noticed Linwood's turquoise ring. It was his friend's, the same one he was wearing the night he was murdered. The capture of the Briley brothers and Duncan Meekins, just days after the Barton Avenue murders, finally brought a measure of relief to Richmond. For his cooperation, Meekins received a life sentence, incarcerated away from the Brileys. Prosecutors later advocated for his parole. Linwood Briley was sentenced to death for John Gallagher's murder. In addition to 7 life sentences for other murders and robberies, James Briley received 2 death sentences for the murders of Judy and Harvey Barton. The youngest, Anthony Briley, who authorities found no evidence had personally killed anyone, received a life sentence with parole eligibility. Authorities believe they might have killed or severely injured as many as 20 people. By early 1980, Linwood and James were incarcerated at Mecklenburg Correctional Center near Boynton, Virginia. It was considered Virginia's most secure prison. A $20 million facility opened in 1976 and heralded as escape-proof. But the Briley story was far from over. On May 31, 1984, the Briley brothers led the most infamous prison break in U.S. death row history. Along with 4 other death row inmates, Lem Tuggle, Earl Clanton, Derek Peterson, and Willie Jones, they pulled off a brazen, theatrical escape from Mecklenburg. Each of these men had committed shocking and violent crimes. Lem Tuggle had assaulted and murdered a woman in southwestern Virginia just 6 months after being released from prison for a prior homicide. Earl Clanton strangled a 63-year-old librarian during a robbery. Derek Peterson was convicted of killing a supermarket employee during a robbery attempt. A 7th inmate, Dennis Stockton, who was on death row for arranging a contract killing in 1978, assisted in the planning but did not flee. Much of what we know about the escape will later come from Stockton's prison diary. The inmates had spent months secretly planning the operation. They hid homemade knives in the cracks of their cell walls, carefully painted over the repairs, and listened in on guard conversations via the intercom. They tracked the officers' names, assignments, and shift rotations. On the evening of the escape, they got haircuts and shaved to appear less like inmates and more like civilians. Around 8:30 p.m., Earl Clanton hid in the bathroom during evening recreation and overpowered a lone guard in the control room. He then released the others. For over 90 minutes, they held the building hostage, tying up 14 prison staff members and locking them inside a cell. No one outside the building knew anything was wrong. At 10:30, they forced one of the hostages to radio an emergency message about a bomb threat. They placed the TV on a stretcher, covered it with a blanket, and pretended it was an explosive device. Dressed in riot gear, they dramatically sprayed it with fire extinguishers and made their way through the prison doors into a van that had been sent for the fake bomb removal. They then vanished into the night. It took nearly 30 minutes before prison staff realized what had happened. The public reaction was immediate, fearful. Mecklenburg employees and residents of the surrounding rural tobacco region were on edge. Some parked their cars as close to their front doors as possible out of fear. Everyone was scared. In Richmond, people locked their doors, left their porch lights on, and the streets grew quiet. For 19 days, the 2 brothers were on the run. The law caught up with Clanton and Peterson the very next day in Warrenton, North Carolina. They were apprehended in a motel after authorities tracked their movements and executed a swift arrest. Both men were taken into custody without resistance and returned to Virginia under tight security. A week later, on June 8th, Lem Tuggle and Willie Jones were caught in Stamford, Vermont. Their downfall came after Tuggle attempted to rob a local gift shop, an act that immediately drew attention and led to their arrests. The duo was possibly attempting to cross into Canada, but their poor planning and impulsive behavior cut their run short. But it was the Brileys who proved the most elusive. For nearly 3 weeks, they managed to avoid capture, setting off one of the largest manhunts in Virginia's history. The operation involved hundreds of officers from multiple states, FBI agents, and even a bounty hunter. But the break came from routine police work. FBI agents checking prisoner biographies and phone calls discovered calls between the Briley's and their uncle, Johnny Lee Council, who lived in North Philadelphia and had a rap sheet of his own. After a week of surveillance on a garage in a rough neighborhood just blocks from a police precinct, agents made their move. On June 19, 1984, FBI agents surrounded the garage and found Linwood and James Briley casually barbecuing chicken. Both were surrounded by 20 FBI agents and taken into custody without resistance. Their uncle was also arrested and later charged with aiding and abetting fugitives. His bail was set at $1 million. The fallout from the escape was severe. A state investigation revealed that the prison's much-touted security measures were deeply flawed. Mecklenburg was not only vulnerable, it was negligent. Staff had been poorly trained, and protocols were dangerously lax. In response, sweeping reforms were enacted. The recaptured Brileys were returned to Virginia. Linwood Briley was the first to face the electric chair on October 12, 1984. Despite the overwhelming evidence, including witness testimonies and forensic connections to multiple murders, Linwood never admitted guilt. He could have challenged Duncan Meekins' account, potentially saving his own life, by arguing that Meekins was the trigger man, but he refused, perhaps out of pride or psychological defiance. As a prosecutor observed, Linwood refuses to give anyone the satisfaction of having beaten him. After a last meal of steak and baked potatoes, and refusing to make a final statement, Linwood was killed by two 55-second bursts of 2,400 volts of electricity. About 500 demonstrators, some favoring and some opposing capital punishment, gathered outside the prison. Firecrackers were set off at the time of the execution, and one pro-death penalty demonstrator waved a Confederate flag. James Briley followed, meeting the same fate in April 1985. The brutality of the Brileys' crimes made it difficult for anyone to rally significant support against their executions. Even the NAACP, typically an outspoken opponent of the death penalty, was noticeably quiet. Meekins, whose decision to testify was critical to securing the death sentences for James and Linwood, has remained incarcerated to this day. The legacy of the Brileys still lingers. The crime spree and unprecedented escape shattered the illusion of control within the prison system. As one prison employee remarked, "You don't ever get over it. The only reason you walk out of here every day is because the inmates let you walk out." That sentiment echoed years later when another escapee, William Lloyd Turner, faced execution. After Turner's death, his attorney discovered a loaded handgun hidden inside his prison typewriter, a grim reminder that he was allowing them to kill him. Next to the weapon was a note that simply read, "Smile." A final, unsettling echo of the dark and unpredictable world within those prison walls, a world the Briley brothers once dominated. Boston in the late 70s was a city of stark contrasts. On one side stood Ivy League universities that attracted scholars from around the world, but just blocks away, a darker reality thrived. The city's criminal underworld operated in shadowy alleys and seedy back rooms, where organized crime families ruled, drug deals flourished, and betrayals often ended in bloodshed. Blackfriars Pub sat at the crossroads of these two worlds. By day, it operated as an ordinary downtown bar, frequented by office workers and locals. By night, it became a gathering place for Boston's underbelly, criminals, informants, and power players. On June 28, 1978, Jerry Robinson, the janitor, arrived at the pub for his routine cleaning. Descending into the basement office, he stumbled upon a gruesome scene. 5 men executed in cold blood. Their bodies sprawled on the floor. Blood splattered the walls and pooled on the floorboards. The Blackfriars Massacre, it would be dubbed. This wasn't just another crime in a city used to violence. It was a massacre that revealed the thin, fragile divide between Boston's intellectual elite and its criminal underworld. Opened in 1971, The Irish-themed bar on Summer Street served as both a social hub and after hours, a disco. By 1978, it had gained a reputation for its connection to Boston's underbelly, where friendships often came at a price. But that June morning, Blackfriars became the scene of a slaughter. Inside its basement office lay 5 men, each shot execution style in the head. The victims aged 31 to 37, their lives intertwined in ways that would baffle investigators for decades. Among the dead was Vincent Salmonte, the pub's owner. Salmonte wasn't just a businessman. He was deeply entrenched in Boston crime, with ties to powerful crime families. Beside him lay John Jack Kelly, the pub's manager and a former investigative journalist. Kelly's sharp mind and street smarts had earned him both friends and enemies in the city's underworld. The others included Peter Merritt, a friend of Kelly's with no significant criminal ties, Charles McGarrion, a low-level offender with a history of petty crimes, and Freddie De La Vega, a known associate of the Winter Hill Gang, one of Boston's most feared criminal organizations, led by the infamous James Whitey Bulger. Each man met the same grisly end, a bullet to the head. Some shot so brutally that their skulls were left shattered. For law enforcement, this wasn't a random act of violence. It was calculated, professional, and deeply personal. The killer struck after closing time, ensuring minimal witnesses. Curiously, the pub's safe was found open, but the $15,000 inside remained untouched. As for theories, some suggested that the massacre was retribution for a botched drug deal. Others speculated that one or more of the victims had crossed the wrong people. Detectives were quick to rule out Peter Merritt and Charles McGarrion as intended targets. Merritt's only crime was having a friendship with Jack Kelly, and McGarrion, while no saint, had no enemies capable of such a brutal act. Attention turned to the remaining 3 victims, Kelly, De La Vega, and Salmonte. Jack Kelly was a man of contradictions, a journalist who cultivated friendships with mobsters to uncover stories. He was drawn to the criminal underworld like a moth to a flame, one friend recalled, but had his connections finally caught up with him. The new job as a freelance TV producer on the horizon, some wondered if Kelly had learned too much or if someone feared he might expose secrets. Freddie De La Vega's ties to the Winter Hill Gang made him a natural suspect, but targeting a member of such a powerful crew was a risky move. Retaliation from Whitey Bulger's organization would have been swift and unforgiving. Vincent Salmonte, however, was perhaps the most likely target, a man of ambition and vice. Salmonte's dealings in the cocaine game and rumored debts to powerful syndicates painted a target on his back. Had he betrayed the wrong people, or was his murder a warning to others? While the city mourned and speculated, police zeroed in on 2 men, Robert Italiano and William Lorardi, both linked to the patriarchal crime family. The trial in 1978 captivated the public, but a lack of solid evidence led to their acquittal. Another name whispered was Nicholas Femia, an enforcer for the Winter Hill Gang. Whitey Bulger himself vouched for Femia's innocence, but years later Bulger's retraction only deepened the mystery. Femia's death in 1983, shot during a supposed robbery, raised further questions. Then there was the Briley Brothers. Vincent, aka Jimmy, Stephen. Jimmy's violent reputation and ties to several victims made him a prime suspect, while Stephen's chilling nickname, the Rifleman, hinted at his deadly skills. Finally, there was James Martorano, a man straddling the worlds of the Winter Hill Gang and the patriarchal family. His connections to Kelly and his history of violence made him another name investigators couldn't ignore. Despite the extensive list of suspects, no one was ever convicted of the Blackfriars Massacre. The case remains unsolved, a grim chapter in Boston's storied history of crime and corruption. As the years passed, the whispers of what happened that night grew fainter, but the questions and assumptions remained. Someone crossed the wrong person, or had to be silenced, and more than one of them were just plain unlucky to be in that basement in the first place. The phone lines of American federal prisons carry countless conversations. Some mundane, some desperate. In the early 2000s, from inside a federal detention center, the voice of Philadelphia drug kingpin Kaboni Savage cut through the wires with a chilling declaration to a girlfriend.
That's all I dream about, killing rats.
It was a promise he'd fulfill, not just against those who dared to testify, but against their family, innocent children included. This is the story of Kaboni Savage, a North Philadelphia man who earned the name King of Witness Intimidation. Kaboni Savage, born January 1st, 1975, grew up in North Philly's Richard Allen Projects, a tough neighborhood before moving to Hunting Park. He left Frankfort High School after 9th grade, deeply influenced by his father, Joe, who was already deep in the streets, and his father's partner, Bubby Thomas. Early on, Savage showed promise as a boxer. He trained at the Front Street Gym in North Philly, had a 15-0 amateur record, and even briefly turned professional in 1997, winning his only pro fight in the welterweight division. But the streets had more pull than the ring. It was the golden age of narcotics after all. Around the time he boxed professionally in the mid-90s, Savage started selling. He showed a knack for the hustle, outselling local dealers and making a name for himself. Soon, he was selling PCP, mainly from his mother's house on Darien Street, and he grew to be a major distributor of PCP, marijuana, crack, and cocaine. By the late 1990s, Savage controlled multiple blocks of North Philadelphia. To boost profits, he began diluting and recompressing drugs. This way, Savage could increase the volume of his product without getting more raw materials. To dilute the drugs, he would mix them with any other substances, often inactive fillers or less potent chemicals, effectively stretching his supply. After dilution, the altered mixture would recompress back into a solid form, like bricks or rocks, to mimic the appearance and texture of an unadulterated product. This enabled him to sell large quantities of product from the same initial amount of pure drugs, maximizing his earnings and significantly increasing his profit margins. To stay on top, Savage and his crew, the Kaboni Savage organization, partook in murders, beatings, kidnappings, and threats against anyone who crossed him: customers, rivals, henchmen, even cops. By the 2000s, Eugene Coleman was his right-hand man, and he had a tight-knit group of enforcers, notably Kareem Bluntly and Lamont Lewis. But what made Savage distinct from other kingpins of the time was a pact he held his crew to. If any member cooperated with police, their mothers would become a target. This was a binding oath, ensuring compliance through everyone's worst fear. Gradually, during the transition from pro boxer to kingpin, Savage lost his humanity. In March of 1998, Savage was around 8th and Butler, a corner belonging to Tybius Flowers, another former boxer and current dealer. A man named Kenneth Lassiter, a barber from Lawnside, New Jersey, in town to visit a friend, had the misfortune of bumping into Savage's car. A confrontation ensued, and despite Lassiter's apology, Savage allegedly said, "Does anyone know this guy?" to some bystanders, including Flowers. When no one claimed to know Lassiter, Savage drew a gun and shot him once, fatally. This brazen murder had consequences beyond the killing itself. Before it, Flowers and Savage had maintained a fragile peace, respecting each other's territory despite being rivals. But by committing a homicide on Flowers' corner, Savage brought a wave of police attention, effectively shutting down Flowers' operation. Flowers would eventually recover, but the infraction stayed on his mind. This moment foreshadowed the violence that would define the KSO. 2 years later, in 2000, Savage became suspicious of Mansour Shafiq Abdullah, a supplier he believed was overcharging him. Ironically, Savage had taught Abdullah how to dilute and reprocess coke, a trick Savage now feared was being used to screw him over. When Abdullah showed up to collect the debt, Savage handed him cash in a red sneaker box and instructed enforcer Kareem Bluntly to escort him home under the pretense of security. Eugene Coleman was told to pick up Bluntly shortly afterward. Bluntly came back with the red sneaker box and the cash. He had shot Abdullah, but he wasn't sure if he was dead. Savage told Coleman to go find out. Coleman went and later confirmed that he saw Abdullah slumped over in his car. Authorities later found the car set on fire with Abdullah inside, his body burned to a charred warning. By September 2001, Savage had turned on Carlton Brown, a trusted member of the KSO. Brown was suspected of killing Savage's close friend, Ronald Walston. Savage told Lamont Lewis that he had to do it, insinuating murder. Lewis complied and killed Brown. Lewis would carry out more killings at Savage's direction when Barry Parker appeared to be making moves on territory run by Steve Norrington, one of Savage's lieutenants. Northington complained. Savage's response was chilling.
Nobody come and take nothing. You have to handle your business. This is what we do.
On February 26, 2003, Lewis and Northington spotted Parker on the disputed corner. Lewis shot him several times and put the feud to rest. That same year, another killing reinforced Savage's paranoia and control. He suspected Tyrone Tolliver, a friend of Coleman's, of planning the tale. When Tolliver approached Savage to fill a cocaine order, Savage had Coleman take him to Tolliver's apartment, where the crew typically recompressed coke. Shortly after, Bluntly arrived and immediately shot Tolliver. Coleman was caught completely off guard. Tolliver's murder served two purposes: removing a suspected snitch and putting dirt on Coleman, who Savage now believed had loose lips. To tighten loyalty further, Savage and his closest associates agreed that if any one of them cooperated with the cops, their mothers would be targeted. Though Coleman wasn't present when this pact was made, Savage made sure he got the message. Savage's efforts to silence witnesses continued when he was finally arrested for Lassiter's murder in 2004. While awaiting trial, he focused on taking out Tybius Flowers, the prosecution's key witness. Savage told Lewis, also incarcerated, that Flowers wouldn't make it to court. True to Savage's word, Flowers was ambushed and gunned down in the car outside his aunt's home the night before the trial. No one was caught at the scene, but Stephen Northington later bragged to another inmate about slumping Flowers and sending him to rat heaven. Savage also told the same prisoner that he had spanked the case. With Flowers gone, the prosecution's case collapsed, and Savage was acquitted in April 2004. But, just days after his release, federal authorities arrested him on drug trafficking and related charges. The Lassiter murder had placed him on the Fed's radar years earlier, and by now, informants were coming forward with details about the KSO's inner workings. From jail, Savage continued to direct the KSO's operation from his jail cell. He learned that Coleman, who was also in jail, was talking. Savage spread the word, and Coleman received threats from other inmates connected to KSO. In a prison visiting room, Coleman saw Savage's sister, Kidada Savage. She encouraged him to not let these crackers break you. Kidada later wrote to Coleman encouraging him not to say anything. She closed the letter with,
"Death before dishonor to your family."
Coleman understood that this was a threat to his blood family, not members of the KSO. The threats turned to action. While Coleman waited in a holding cell at the courthouse, Savage and another associate were placed nearby, likely a setup by the feds. Savage reportedly told Coleman that his family deserved to die. He had made plans for a firebombing of the Coleman family home. Knowing Savage's reputation, federal agents had encouraged Coleman's 54-year-old mother to move to a new house after the murder of Tyrone Tolliver. She refused. Through prison visits and phone calls, Savage meticulously planned the murders. Savage even used jail toilets to pass instructions. Kidada, described as cold, demented, and sociopathic as her older brother, relayed Savage's orders to Lewis and Merritt and identified Coleman's mother's home. Savage's motivation was captured in recorded calls.
The kids got to pay for making kids cry. and I want to smack one of their 4-year-old sons in the head with a bat. Straight up. I have dreams about killing their kids, cutting their heads off.
In the early morning hours of October 9, 2004, Lewis and Merritt drove to the Philadelphia row house. Lewis kicked in the door and fired 2 shots before Merritt lit and threw 2 gasoline cans with lit cloth fuses into the home. It caused an explosion. The inferno consumed the house, killing all 6 occupants. The victims were Eugene Coleman's 54-year-old mother, Marcella, found on the floor by the boys' bed, apparently trying to rescue them. His 15-month-old son, his twin brother's 15-year-old son, his sister's 12-year-old son, his cousin Tamika Nash found kneeling over his son and Tamika's 10-year-old daughter. Lamont Lewis, who later pleaded guilty and testified against Savage, later expressed to Kidada his concern that children had died in the fire. Kidada responded. For this sadistic act, Lewis reportedly received $2,000 and a bottle of PCP, while Merritt received a used car and $500. Subsequent prison recordings capture Savage's great satisfaction that the killings had taken place and other plans to kill more witnesses and their families. The Coleman firebombing stands as the most horrific example of witness retaliation in recent Philadelphia history. A long-term multi-agency investigation led by Philadelphia's FBI Safe Streets Task Force gathered evidence, including Savage's own words from informants and court-authorized wiretaps in the prison visiting room and even the prison plumbing system. Kaboni Savage was convicted in 2013 on 12 counts of murder and other trafficking charges. On May 31, 2013, a federal jury voted for the death penalty for Savage, making him the first defendant in the Eastern District of Pennsylvania to receive a federal death sentence since its reinstatement in 1988. Savage was sent to ADX Florence Supermax, where he has resided since. FBI Special Agent Kevin Lewis, who spent 14 years on the case, noted that when Savage received his death sentence, he turned to look into the audience, and there was nobody there for him. There were people for the victims, but nobody in the audience for Savage. Savage's sister, Kidada, and Robert Merritt were also sentenced to life in connection with the RICO conspiracy and the Coleman family murders. Stephen Northington was convicted of 2 murders and received a life sentence. In a bitter twist, in May 2009, Kaboni Savage's 9-year-old daughter, Sierra Savage, was killed in York, Pennsylvania, an innocent victim of a gang-related shooting. Her death had no connection to her father's violent past. In December 2024, President Joe Biden announced a commutation of sentences for 37 of the 40 people on federal death row, including Kaboni Savage. His punishment was converted to life in prison. Kaboni Savage's reign, built on unshakable belief that,
without the witnesses, you don't have no case,
ultimately crumbled under the weight of the very violence he championed. The story of a man who dreamed of killing brats and everyone they loved.
In the pre-dawn hours of June 14th, 1971, a red brick house on 1970 Hazelwood Street became the stage for a harrowing crime. At precisely 4:30 a.m., the living room in one of the building's apartments rang out with echoes of gunfire. The policemen from the 10th Precinct got urgent calls from neighbors between 12th and 14th Street as they reported the gunshots. Meanwhile, the wife of a certain Robert Gardner dialed the police, sharing a horrifying discovery that she had found her husband wounded and dying. She rushed him to the Henry Ford Hospital and urgently pleaded, "There is a bloodbath in that house, and you better send some police." Upon the cops' arrival, they found a slaughter in that apartment. 7 lives were quashed in what was now the scene of the largest mass murder Detroit PD had ever seen. The victims would be identified as Catherine Louise Winston, age 19, Narcissa Lee Brown, age 19, Catherine Betty Basser, age 22, Sharon Brown, age 20, Romando Burton, age 24, Carl Carrington Mounts Jr., age 27, and Lloyd Kenneth Tyler, age 27. They were all now silent witnesses to the brutality that had unfolded in that living room that early morning. Upon further investigation of the crime scene, the police established that all the victims were shot in the head at point-blank range. Also, all victims were of African American descent. Scattered on the ground, they found cartridges from 3 different guns: a .30 caliber carbine, a .32 caliber pistol, and a .45 caliber automatic. The bodies were sprawled across the room, and their positions revealed a narrative of their final moments. Once seated on the floor, 2 men were found lying with their heads resting in the fireplace. 3 women were on the couch, and 1 was on the floor nearby. Mysteriously, the 3 women had their hands bound with rubber surgical tubing, with one holding the waist of another. The 8th victim, Robert Gardner, lay dead from shots to the mouth, chest, and stomach. It appeared that after being shot, he had fallen 10 feet from the front door. The police theorized he was the first to be shot as he answered the door and was hit almost instantly. He was rushed to Henry Ford Hospital, where, never having regained consciousness, he succumbed to his wounds on June 20th, 6 days later. Each body was a tragic piece in this grim puzzle. James Bannon, the district inspector of the Detroit Homicide Bureau, led a team of 20 detectives in the investigation of the case. They found that the crime scene bore no signs of a struggle or any indication that the victims had attempted to escape. And although there initially seemed to be no witnesses to the incident, it all changed when 3 individuals who escaped the massacre sought refuge and assistance at the police headquarters. Among them were 2 women and a man, all of whom escaped by breaking through the rear window of the sun porch, followed by a spirited run down an alley. As the detectives investigated the house, they found the rooms had minimal furniture and water had splashed onto the floor from a bullet that struck a waterbed when the killers fired at Mr. Gardner. A more thorough search revealed 5 handguns and 5 long guns, including a sawed-off shotgun. None of these firearms bore recent traces of discharge. They also found a collection of heroin paraphernalia: spoons, tinfoil, hypodermic needles, and several small packets suspected to contain heroin. Although the retrieved items helped to make some hypotheses, the neighbors' observations about the activities within the house drew a clearer picture. That morning, 4 men had been seen fleeing the crime scene. Allegedly, they were oddly dressed in windbreakers and Scottish tam o' shanter hats. Vera Gibson, a resident who lived in the apartment directly above the crime scene, became an unwitting witness. She reported to have heard the shattering of glass, which was the escape of the 3 survivors. Her senses heightened further as she heard Mrs. Gardner urgently running up the stairs, her voice carrying the shocking revelation that her husband had been shot. Desperate for assistance, she requested to use Mrs. Gibson's phone. The Gibsons, unfortunately, didn't own one. In the eyes of the Gibsons, the Gardners, described as a pleasant couple, had recently become part of the neighborhood fabric. Interviews with other neighbors added another layer to the narrative. They recounted observing several young folk frequenting the Gardner residence, coming and going under the cloak of night. A vigilant young patrolman stationed on the stoop, safeguarding the house, revealed another bit of information. He revealed that such houses, like the one he guarded, were often used as dope houses. What's more, these dope houses were often targets of stick-ups, a possible motive for the crime. Another young witness stepped forward, recounting instances where concerned locals had alerted the police, urging an investigation into the activities transpiring within the house in question. Nothing was ever done about it. This wasn't the first time this had happened. Historically, Detroit locals had complained many times before that their reports to the police about suspected drug activities in black neighborhoods often went unresolved. The signs of late-night comings and goings, indicative of potential drug dens, became whispers in the shadows, unanswered by the forces meant to protect. In their defense, the police expressed the challenge of acting without concrete evidence, as entering these suspected dens had always been a risky job. Attempts to make undercover purchases carried the risk of a hostile reception, with strangers often being greeted with the barrel of a shotgun. Complicating matters further, even if a dealer was arrested, posting bail would swiftly return them to the streets, resuming their illicit trade within days. Bannon, who led the investigation of the apartment, suspected the victims to be felons. He revealed that 4 out of the 7 had previous run-ins with the law, entangled in crimes related to narcotics and prostitution. Among them, Lloyd Tyler emerged as a figure with a troubled history, marked by multiple felony convictions. Tyler's criminal journey included a significant 1968 robbery of a jewelry store that escalated into the police. Notably, he battled heroin addiction, and his legal obligations mandated entry into a federal narcotics treatment center in Kentucky as a probation condition. However, citing his antisocial behavior, the center rejected him. There was no doubt in Inspector Bannon's mind that the apartment was a drug den popular with local underworld figures. Shedding light on the perplexing nature of the case, he stated, "There is no question of an execution-type slaying, but we do not know what the motive was." One theory presented by Inspector Bannon was rooted in a series of robberies targeting narcotics dens that plagued the city throughout the year. He described these locations as ideal victims due to their possession of both money and drugs, coupled with their reluctance to involve the police. However, the discovery of around $600 on Mr. Gardner and small amounts on the other victims raised skepticism about robbery being the primary motive. An alternative scenario proposed by Bannon painted a picture of a potential turf war among narcotics rings. He had highlighted the fragmented state of the narcotics trade in Detroit, suggesting an ongoing struggle between various factions vying for control. Lastly, the police floated a theory suggesting a revenge plot tied to a deceitful transaction involving Robert Gardner. The conjecture held that an individual who potentially bought counterfeit heroin from Gardner sought retribution. They surmised that the 7 other victims were uninvolved in the beef, mere casualties of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. The revenge theory gained traction when investigators found a substance within the apartment initially believed to be heroin. However, subsequent analysis revealed it to be a concoction of milk, sugar, and quinine. Law enforcement now began pursuing leads suggesting that Gardner might have crossed some other drug dealers in the past. As it stood, the investigation had Robert Gardner as the primary target of the attack. The other victims, described as Gardner's associates, comprised 3 dealers and 4 prostitutes. The police proposed a theory of the victims being systematically eliminated as witnesses to Gardner's murder. Law enforcement also now had enough info to name Gardner and another individual, Gerald Williams, as middle-rank heroin dealers. Gardner also happened to be a pimp. However, the unfolding story took another dark twist just 4 days after the massacre. Gerald Williams, implicated as a potential collaborator, was fatally shot 6 times at a motel on Detroit's west side. Police speculated that Williams may have orchestrated Gardner's setup, guiding the assailants to his location. Further suspicions arose that Williams might have been present during the Hazelwood massacre, leading to his subsequent elimination to silence him as a witness. As the investigation into the Hazelwood tragedy unfolded, a new connection emerged, leading detectives on a trail to Toronto, Canada. A specialized team of homicide detectives was dispatched to unravel the threads of this mysterious lead. Insiders later revealed a web of intrigue involving Gerald Williams and a heroin supply network spanning Toronto. Allegedly, Williams supplied heroin to Toronto dealers, but discord arose when the substance was found to be diluted. Robert Gardner stepped into the scene, taking charge of supplying the Canadians. However, suspicions lingered that Gardner was also tampering with the product. The origins of this story were traced back to March, when discontented Toronto dealers, displeased with the diluted heroin, started looking for a new supplier in Detroit. Gardner, aware of their intentions, planned a daring move. He kidnapped their representative from a taxicab and used him as a pawn to access the motel room where the Toronto dealers were staying. Gardner and an accomplice reportedly robbed the dealers, escaping with a loot of $13,000 in cash, $4,000 in jewelry, and $3,000 to $4,000 in cocaine. Unexpectedly, rather than killing the men, Gardner released the dealers and their intermediary. Allegedly, in response to the Toronto dealers nursing a vendetta, hired gunmen to eliminate Gardner. Sensing the impending threat, Gardner shifted his residence from 2635 Cortlandt to 95 Portage in Highland Park, a location reportedly used by two other victims, Lloyd Tyler and Romando Burton, for heroin distribution under Gardner's wing. Eager to stay one step ahead, Gardner then relocated to the Hazelwood apartment. The running and hiding continued, with Gardner even venturing to New York City. However, a planned phone call from Gerald Williams, enticing Gardner with a potentially lucrative drug deal, lured him back to Detroit, where he was planned to meet his end. All in all, the case wound up sounding like something out of a movie plot. A black dealer and pimp swindles some Canadian gangsters, then unwisely robs them and releases them after. Spends the last few months of his life looking over his shoulder, then dies along with 7 others by the guns of some men in Scottish hats. Sadly for the victims, not much more progress was made in the case. To this day, no arrests have ever been made, and the case remains open. Aside from being the biggest unsolved mass shooting in US history, the Hazelwood Massacre was and still is the most significant mass slaying in Detroit. It unfolded in the backdrop of a record-breaking year for murders in 1971, with 690 lives lost. The most brutal highlight of the deadliest decade in Detroit. A decade that earned Detroit a moniker that still lingers to this day: Murder City.
LA had Watts, New York had Brownsville, and Philly had the Bottom. Not one neighborhood but a nickname for a cluster of adjacent poor black neighborhoods. In the year 2000, Pennsylvania was suffering through a gun violence epidemic, a violence that the authorities and law enforcement were trying and failing to stem or stop. The year 1990 had seen 500 homicides committed in the city, a rate of violence that was nearly 4 times the average rate across the U.S. And for the next 8 years, the number of people off within the city would stay above 400 every single year. Philly was home to the Black Mafia and the Junior Black Mafia, the K&A gang, the Philadelphia crime family, and even motorcycle gangs. A melting pot of people and groups, willing and able to do whatever it took to get to the top. By December 28th of 2000, there had already been 310 killings in Philadelphia that year. This number would go up to 317 on this single day. Initially, due to the scale of the crime, The police suspected that it was a case of a turf war or gang violence, albeit a very extreme example of it. However, the core source of the issue was eventually discovered to be a lot more pedestrian than that. It turned out that one of the shooting victims had not long ago made a car swap deal. He owned a Dodge Intrepid that he had exchanged with another man for $300 and a Chevrolet Corsica. But the Corsica was a manual or stick shift, which the victim was unfamiliar with, and he ended up wrecking the clutch. When he realized that the car was essentially now useless, or at the very least would need an expensive clutch replacement, he went back to the man who had traded the car with him. By this time, the Dodge had been swapped by the initial buyer to a second man, this time for a pistol. The victim asked for his car back and refused to replace the clutch on the Corsica. When his proposal was obviously rejected, he went home and came back the next day with a spare set of keys to steal his Dodge back. This seemingly low-stakes exchange would end up being the catalyst for the massacre that day, at least according to those involved. Armed and masked up, 3 men entered the crack house on 816 North Lex Street on the afternoon of 28th of December 2000. The gunman quickly rounded up 10 people in the house in the living room. After getting them to hand over whatever small amounts of cash they had on them, they were all made to lie down on the floor. Crucially, at this point, the mask slipped off one of the gunmen. Scared that they'd be identified and the prospect of retaliation or arrest, they made a decision. They shot them all. The gunman fled the house on foot, then jumped into a getaway car and sped off. 6 men died at the scene while a 33-year-old woman was transported to a hospital, later dying there. The worst mass killing in Philadelphia history at the time had just taken place, and it would take a while for any clear answers to emerge. The victims ranged in the age from young as 15 up to 54, and 3 people in the house survived the shooting. Shortly after, authorities arrested 4 men for the crime. The initial feeling was that the case was likely drug or gang related, as a sergeant in the homicide division of the city police will be quoted saying, "There's information they were dealing crack out of the house and in the area." Sakan Yuk, Jamel Lewis, Ezekiel Thomas, Keontae Perrin were all taken into custody and charged with multiple counts of murder and other charges such as robbery and weapon charges. They were arrested based on eyewitness accounts from a friend of one of the victims and had been facing the death penalty if they ended up convicted. Police claimed that some of the men had confessed, a claim that was denied by their family and friends. However, despite all 4 of them being taken into custody and held in jail for a year and a half, all the charges against them ended up being dropped due to lack of evidence. The case collapsed shortly before the trial began, despite one prosecutor telling the judge that they were willing to try the case until hell freezes over. Given that all 4 of them were entirely innocent in the whole affair, they later sued for their wrongful arrest and lengthy incarceration, receiving a payout of $1.9 million. The city as a whole, especially the local community, felt that law enforcement and the prosecutors had made a snap decision under pressure to get anyone on the hook for the crime. This would put the authorities back to square one when it came to finding the culprits and making any progress towards getting some form of closure for the families and loved ones of the multiple victims. So who did it? It would be almost 2 years after the shooting in 2002 when the police would arrest a second set of 4 men on suspicion of Octuple homicide. This time, 2 of the men, Sheehan Black and Bruce Veeney, also known as Snoop, pled guilty and admitted their roles in the crime. They were aged 20 and 26 at the time. Dawood and Khalid Faruqi, aged 26 and 27 at the time of their arrest, pled not guilty. The confession that Black initially provided to the police was dismissed as being fabricated before they later realized that he was telling the truth. Sheehan Black was the man who had made the initial car deal with Porter, one of the victims, handing over $300 in a Chevrolet for the Dodge. Sheehan had then swapped the Dodge with Dawood Faruqi for a pistol. When Porter returned after blowing out the clutch and tried to go back on the deal, Black told him that he had already swapped it for the gun, and Dawood refused to give it back. Once Porter came back the next day and stole the car, Dawood and Sheehan Black recruited Dawood's brother, a lead. To help them and their friend Bruce Vini drive them across to Lex Street where they knew Porter hung out. Shaheen Black received multiple life sentences, as did the Faruqi brothers. All three of them are currently still incarcerated, with 7 life sentences apiece, and none of them eligible for parole. Bruce Vini was found to have been the driver in the case and received a sentence of 15 to 30 years for his part, secured by giving testimony against the other co-accused. He was paroled in March of 2019. The mother of one of the victims, Calvin Helton, spoke outside of the court on the subject of finally seeing the right men convicted of the horror that day. For almost a century, San Quentin's death row has housed the most nefarious individuals from the state of California. In 1988, around 20 to 30 death row inmates belonged to the Crips gang alone. That year, a group of them faced severe punishment after Taekwon Lil Fee Tookie, a member of the Rolling 60s Crips, stabbed another inmate in the neck with a 4.5-inch blade. His target? Stanley Tookie Williams, a founding figure of the Crips. 2 separate heinous mass homicides had landed both men on San Quentin's death row. This is the story of how 2 of the most notorious Crips in LA clashed within the walls of San Quentin. In the 1940s, black gangs first spawned in LA and spread south and west by the 50s and 60s. In the late 60s, Raymond Washington, a fabled street fighter, sought to unite these gangs under one banner. He clicked up with Stanley Tookie Williams, another feared street fighter and bodybuilder known citywide. However, not all the gangs fell in line, and those that didn't form the rival Bloods gang, and by the 70s, the rivalry led to escalating gunplay. The violence surged on through the decade, and Tookie became a victim himself. While recovering from a 1976 drive-by shooting, Tookie redeveloped an addiction to PCP, a mind-altering drug otherwise known as Sherm. It helped him deal with the stress of living a double life. By day, Tookie worked as a counselor in boys' homes, urging them to ditch the gang life and preaching the virtues of bodybuilding. But by night, he was a PCP-filled menace that made a reputation for beating and robbing drug dealers. By the end of the decade, the gang life would take both Raymond and Tookie off the streets for good. After 5 years in prison, Raymond was mysteriously murdered on a street corner in August 1979, shortly after his release. As for Tookie, 1979 would be his last year on the streets as well, after his drug-fueled capers came to a head. On a late Tuesday evening on February 28, 1979, a 24-year-old Tookie, Darryl, Alfred Blackie Coward, and Tony Sims were plotting a robbery. They pulled up to a 7-Eleven where the 26-year-old clerk, Albert Lewis Owens, was sweeping the parking lot. When the crew rolled up, unaware of the threat, Owens left his cleaning tools behind and went inside to serve them. As Darryl and Sims moved toward the cash register, Tookie slipped behind Owens, pulled a shotgun from under his jacket, and coldly told Owens to shut up and keep walking. He marched Owens to the back room where he allegedly shot out the CCTV and shot Owens twice in the back as he lay on the floor. The next chapter in the robbery spree unfolded on March 11, 1979, at the Brookhaven Motel in South Central LA, a motel run by an immigrant Taiwanese family, the Yangs. A 76-year-old father, his 63-year-old wife, their 43-year-old daughter, and their son Robert. At around 5 a.m. that day, Tookie stormed into the motel lobby and smashed his way into the private office. There, he allegedly executed father, wife, and daughter at close range. Their son Robert woke up to the sound of a scream and the gunshots and rushed over to find the massacre and an empty cash register. On March 15th, Tookie and a friend were pulled over and the cops found a double-barreled shotgun in the trunk. At the station, Tookie's friend was questioned on their role in the 2 robberies and 4 murders, and he gave up Tookie. Tookie's trial drew widespread attention, painting a chilling portrait of his ruthlessness. Evidence piled up against him, and the horror of his actions were laid bare for the court. On March 31st, 1981, Tookie Williams was convicted of all 4 murders in both robberies and was sentenced to death. Tookie denied his involvement in the murders until his death. Around the same time, another name was rising up the ranks in the Crips, Taekwon Cox. better known as Lil Fee. Lil Fee came from a broken home and was largely abandoned and unsupervised in the streets of South Central. By his teens, Fee had pledged allegiance with the Rolling 60s Crips, one of the Crips factions. He grew a reputation as a fearless shooter. In the early morning hours of August 31st, 1984, both armed, Fee and Darren Williams entered the house of former NFL player Kermit Alexander's mother, Abora Alexander, on 59th Street in LA. Down the street, 3 others, Horace Burns, Ida Moore, and Lisa Brown, sat in a van, keeping a lookout. A few minutes later, Fee and Williams were back in the getaway vehicle, having killed Abora while she sat at her kitchen table. Her 25-year-old daughter, 12 and 6-year-old grandsons, all while they slept. They separated, and later that night, they left for a spot called the Vermont Club to collect payment for the hit. After, Lil Fee, who had the murder weapon wrapped in a jacket, took it to a friend's apartment, James Kennedy. He instructed him to wash the jacket and get rid of the rifle, but Kennedy wanted to keep the gun and crucially held on to it. Lil Fee bought a Cadillac for $3,000 the same day. The case stayed cold for a month until the cops made a breakthrough when they arrested James Kennedy for narcotics. He gave up Lil Fee and gave them the murder weapon he had held on to. Trial testimony revealed that the Alexander family wasn't the real target. Lil Fee had been hired by Aussie Diamond Jack Jackson, the owner of a local club, to deal with the problem. Valerie Taylor, a young woman who had filed a lawsuit against him after getting shot and paralyzed at his club. Taylor lived just 2 doors down from Kermit's mother, but the near-illiterate Fee and his crew got the address wrong. During the hit, there was a brief tussle between Fee and Kermit Alexander's 14-year-old nephew, Neil, who ran off and survived. Another 13-year-old grandson hid in a closet and survived. It would also be revealed that Kermit Alexander had known Lil Fee as a kid when he coached his Little League team. He remembered him as being angry and combative. During the trial, Fee's defense attorney spoke of his client's upbringing, highlighting how he was abused and abandoned at an early age by his mother, who was a drug addict and prostitute. Growing up in a neighborhood where violent street gangs ruled the blocks, it was sink or swim. But despite the efforts to show Fee as a product of his environment, the cold reality of his choices couldn't be overlooked. On February 28, 1986, after just 3 days of deliberation, the jury handed 18-year-old Tyquan Cox the death penalty. He was sent to the same facility as Tookie. At first, Tookie and Lil Fee were cool in prison, especially since both were heavy into bodybuilding. But their camaraderie quickly turned sour when Tookie gave Fee an order he couldn't bring himself to follow. Tookie ordered Fee to take out Darren Williams, also a Crip who was on death row for his part in the Alexander family murders. Word had reached Tookie that Darren might have been planning on informing, so he immediately wanted him out of the picture. To Tookie's surprise, Fee flatly refused. This sparked a power struggle in San Quentin. Before this incident, most inmates on death row had been known to set aside their beef. They knew that any infraction would hurt their chances of getting retried or their sentences being overturned on appeal. But Lil Fee seemingly didn't have the same foresight. October 10, 1988, while Tookie was walking outside in the exercise yard, he stabbed him in the neck with a 4.5-inch blade. From a gun tower, an officer ordered everyone on the yard to the ground, and Fee tossed his weapon onto the basketball court. The officers rushed to Tookie, who was bleeding out, and when they asked what happened, Tookie said, "I don't know what happened. I don't remember." Despite the grave injury, Tookie survived. After the attack, prison officials put more than a dozen Crip members and associates on death row to grade B status, cutting off their privileges and limiting their exercise time to just 10 hours a week. For his own protection, Fee was isolated in his own exercise yard with one other inmate. Tookie, on the other hand, gradually reinvented himself as a reformed man on a new mission and shifted his focus to fighting for a reduced sentence. He also started writing children's books that preached against gang violence, and his efforts even earned him a nomination for a Nobel Peace Prize. His case split the public into 2 camps, those who believed he genuinely changed and those who doubted his sincerity. Despite all efforts and appeals for clemency, Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger upheld Tookie's death sentence. On December 13, 2005, after refusing a last meal, making no apologies, and having no last words, Stanley Tookie Williams was executed by lethal injection. As for Lil Fee, he tried to make a run for it in July 2000, 5 years before Tookie's execution, with 2 other inmates, Paul Tuiapea and Noel Jackson, also convicted murderers on death row. Fee made a desperate dash for freedom. They charged through a hole they pried open in a chain-link fence, hoping to grab some hostages along the way. But the escape turned into a chaotic mess, and after a rough tussle, the guards managed to wrangle all 3 back into a secure yard. Their botched getaway left the officers scrambling to tackle the serious security flaws dogging San Quentin. Today, Fee still remains in San Quentin, still on death row.
Did you call the police?
No, sir.
Did you tell your family about this?
No, sir.
Because you don't call the police, right?
No, sir.
Not even for your family?
No, sir.
Not even for a 2-year-old?
No, sir.
Not even for a 4-year-old?
No, sir.
Not even for a 5-year-old?
No, sir.
Not even for a 9-year-old?
No, sir.
Not even for a 2-month-old baby?
No, sir.
You don't call the police.
No, sir, I didn't.
For the unacquainted, First 48 is a true crime series that follows homicide detectives during the crucial first 48 hours of a murder investigation. The show has documented hundreds of cases across the U.S., but few haunted viewers and investigators more than 2008's Season 7, Episode 6 in Memphis. It chronicles one of the worst mass murders ever covered by the series. From the moment detectives stepped inside the house, it was clear this case would be unlike any other. In March 2008, 30-year-old Cecil Dotson Sr., his fiancée Marissa Williams, and his 5 children, ranging in age from 9 to 2 months, had been living at 722 Leicester Street in Memphis, Tennessee. Cecil's brother, Jesse Dotson, recently released from prison, was living with their sister, Nicole Dotson, at Goodwill Village. Jesse, known as Junior to family, had moved in during August 2007 and was working with his father, Jesse Sr., as a painter. On Saturday, March 1st, Jesse Sr., Jesse Jr., and William Waddell, Cecil and Jesse's half-brother Fat, went to 722 Leicester to watch a Memphis Tigers basketball game. Cecil was outside cleaning his grill and prepping to barbecue. The TV couldn't pick up the broadcast, and around 6 or 6:30 p.m., Jesse Sr. left. Waddell stayed until around 10:30 or 11 p.m. Everything was fine when he left. The next morning, Jesse Sr. returned to pick up Jesse Jr. for work, but he wasn't at Nicole's apartment. Nicole didn't know where he was. Later that evening, Jesse Jr. called and claimed he'd argued with his girlfriend, Sheila Jones, who hid his phone. He gave no clear reason for missing work. That same night, Jesse Jr. casually asked Waddell if he wanted to stop by Cecil's, but they didn't go. On March 3rd, Cecil failed to show up for work. Concerned, Erica Smith, the mother of Cecil's 2-year-old son, Cecil II, visited the Leicester Street home around 3 p.m. The storm door was shut, but the interior door was open. She heard music playing and saw the television and family photos, but no signs of life. No one answered her knocks. Erica repeatedly called Waddell at work, expressing growing worry. Eventually, he told her to call the police. The moment officers stepped through the door, a metallic smell overwhelmed them. A foot was visible just inside the entrance. Everything was bloodstained. Floors, walls, sofas, beds, even the ceiling. 4 adult bodies, Cecil, Marissa Williams, Hollis Seals, and Shendry Robertson, were sprawled across the small living room, all dead from multiple gunshots. No vital checks were needed. The blood was old, the body stiff. As Officer Davis and others cleared the home, they discovered horror upon horror. First the bloody knives and wooden boards all over the house. Then, in the bathroom, 9-year-old CJ lay motionless in a tub filled with congealed blood. A sawzall blade, an industrial cutting knife, was embedded in his skull. He was presumed dead by the state he was in, but his eyes twitched. He was alive. In bedroom 2, 4-year-old Samario was dead. Nearby, 2-year-old Cecil II and 5-year-old Cedric were also found, both in terrible shape. Cecil II was deceased, but Cedric miraculously was still alive. In another room, 2-month-old Sanaya was found in her crib, battered but breathing. None of the children would have survived without immediate surgery. EMTs and officers unanimously agreed that it was the worst thing they had ever seen. The killer had used multiple weapons, a 9mm and a .380 caliber gun, neither of which was recovered. Bullets were found lodged in sofa cushions, walls, and under furniture. A sealed Ziploc bag containing 16 shell cases was discovered beneath the jacket. Clearly, someone had tried to clean up, but the blood evidence painted a different story. The adults had been staged. Caesar was found kneeling, a massive bag of marijuana placed in his hand. An unused shotgun sat near him, but investigators found no blood on the clothes underneath it, indicating it was placed post-mortem. Cecil had been shot multiple times, some injuries inflicted after death. Shindri Robertson was posed to look assaulted. Her shirt was pulled up, pants down, and crack cocaine placed near her privates, but her bullet wounds indicated she was clothed when shot. The items found nearby suggested someone had emptied her purse. Marissa Williams' body was slumped unnaturally across Robertson's. Blood pooling contradicted their final positions. Even Hollis Seals' body showed signs of manipulation. His pants were pulled down, and a void in a nearby blood pool suggested he'd been moved. Each of the 5 children had been assaulted with wooden boards and kitchen knives, which were later found broken, the handles missing. 5 blades were recovered, including the one lodged in CJ's skull. In bedroom 2, blood splattered the ceiling, blinds, bed, and even the fan. The directionality of the stains showed a prolonged, savage attack. CJ had a large, bloody palm print next to him. Samario's hair beads were scattered throughout the bathroom and another bedroom, suggesting movement during or after the attack. Upon learning that 3 children had somehow survived, police immediately quarantined them for fear of a second attack. Only police and approved medical personnel were allowed access. Tactical unit officers guarded the hospital room doors. What happened at Leicester Street is tied for the largest mass murder in Tennessee history. Homicide detectives knew immediately this wasn't random. Whoever knocked on the door had been allowed in, and the primary target was clearly Cecil. Early theories pointed to a gang hit. Cecil had known ties to the gangster disciples. Staged bodies, drugs, and sexual positioning supported this theory. But something wasn't right. Detectives had seen gang violence before, but nothing this bad. A $30,000 reward was put out, and over 100 tips came in. One claimed Cecil had borrowed $300K from a dealer and was scared for his life. None of the tips proved useful. Meanwhile, Jesse Dotson gave an extensive statement to police on March 4th. He described his movements the night of March 1st, naming people they'd visited, apartments they entered, and weed deals they made. He claimed he was dropped off around 2:30 a.m. and denied returning to Leicester Street at all. Jesse suspected the murders may have had something to do with a man named Doc. Cecil and Doc were both gangster disciples and had an alleged ongoing beef, apparently stemming from Cecil's failure to show up to a gang meeting. There were over 25 people named Doc in the Memphis PD files, but before they could track them all, Doc himself called homicide and showed up to the precinct. He claimed he had nothing to do with the murders, but led on that in the GD world, a blackout meant an entire family could be targeted, but only if ordered by a high-ranking member. This narrative caused a brief detour in the investigation as police sought a GD powerful enough to order the blackout. Meanwhile, as the investigation progressed, forensic and medical teams worked around the clock to save the kids. Police feared CJ might die before they could get answers. On March 5th, investigators attempted to interview him, but he was too delirious. Finally, on March 7th, he was lucid enough to talk. When asked who did it, he responded, "Uncle Junior killed my parents." Jesse was brought in for a second interview. He repeated his original story, but then he grew quiet and unresponsive. Deputy Director Armstrong stepped in, watching Dotson's body language. He sensed a confession coming. Armstrong played the tape of CJ naming Uncle Junior. Dotson cracked. He confessed to the entire crime. According to Jesse, he and Cecil started arguing while driving home. Back at the house, things escalated, and Cecil reached behind the couch for a shotgun. Jesse shot him first. Then, he shot the other adults in the room. Then the kids, because they had seen him. CJ had tried calling for help. Jesse stabbed him in the head. He then beat the others with boards and stabbed them. He claimed he left via bicycle, cleaned himself with bleach, and staged the scene to look like a gang hit. He later confirmed this confession to his mother. When asked why he hurt the baby, he just shook his head. Jesse Dotson grew up in violence. His father was abusive, the family constantly moving. He attended 10 different schools and was diagnosed with learning disabilities. By 19, he had killed a man in a drug deal gone wrong. He was sentenced to 14 years for it. Authorities later learned that there was speculation Cecil had informed on Jesse. He had only one visitor in 14 years, his mother, and only once. His sister, Nicole, later said he constantly reminded her of that abandonment. In prison, Jesse joined the Kitchen Crips gang and committed numerous violent infractions. When Jesse was released in 2007, it was Cecil who picked him up. CJ recalls his dad saying good things about him that day. By the trial date in 2010, Jesse had recanted his confession. He claimed it was forced by the police and that he had actually hid under the bed during the shooting. CJ, just 9 years old, took the stand. He remembers seeing his father get shot. He recalls saying to his uncle, "I love you," and hearing back, "No, you don't." The jury returned a verdict after just 90 minutes. Guilty on all counts. Jesse Dotson was convicted of 6 counts of first-degree murder and 3 counts of attempted first-degree murder. 6 death sentences plus 120 years. His execution was set for March 2nd, 2012, the 4-year anniversary of the murders, but complications with Tennessee's lethal injection protocols delayed it. Jesse Dotson remains on death row, where he protests his innocence to this day. The Leicester Street murder showed us what happens when rage, resentment, and trauma collide. CJ survived, but he carries the graphic memories of that day. He saw and heard the whole thing. He has metal plates in his head and still has occasional surgeries. He hasn't forgiven Jesse. Jesse believes CJ was manipulated into lying. He insists the full 5-hour confession tape filmed by the first 48 will exonerate him. The Leicester Street Murders episode is only 43 minutes long. According to Jesse, it's not over.
Mr. Dotson, we just want the truth. That's what we
And that's
want.
what I want. That's exactly what I want.
We want the truth.
That's exactly what I want. I want the exact same thing y'all want, the truth. I've been sitting in jail 2.5 years. For what? Nothing.
For nothing?
For nothing.
For nothing.
For nothing.